Hello there. So, if you're in the UK at the moment, chances are you're looking outside at some pretty calm, maybe even clear weather, with a definite chill in the air. But, and this is a big but, you really shouldn't let that fool you. We are literally on the edge of a huge shift in our weather. This quiet, frosty spell is about to be shoved aside by a really volatile storm that's brewing up out in the Atlantic. So, in this explainer, we're going to follow this whole story, from the frosty calm right through to the atmospheric battle that's going to define the week ahead. Let's get right into it. So here's what we've got on the cards. First, we'll dive into this frosty, deceptive calm that's covering the country right now. Then, we'll turn our eyes westward to that gathering Atlantic storm. After that, we're going to look at why this particular low-pressure system is just so tricky to forecast. We'll also zoom out to see the huge continental cold block that's pulling the strings, and then we'll break down exactly what you should expect next. And finally, we'll look beyond the next few days to see what the rest of the month might have in store. Right, let's kick things off with what's happening right now. The first part of our story is all about this frosty but very deceptive calm. You know, it's the kind of quiet weather that feels really settled and stable, but it's actually the perfect opening act for the much more dramatic events that are forecast for later this week. As we push into Wednesday morning, a huge part of the UK is in for a properly cold night. For a lot of us, temperatures are going to drop well below freezing, which means we're looking at a pretty widespread and sharp frost. It's a really noticeable drop, especially when you think about the milder weather some of us have had recently. So why is it getting so cold all of a sudden? Well, this is the culprit: a ridge of high pressure. The best way to think about it is like a giant, invisible dome of air pressing down, basically putting a lid on our weather. This is what gives us those lovely clear skies overnight. But there's a catch. With no cloud blanket to trap in any warmth, all the heat from the day just radiates away into space, and the temperatures right down here at the surface absolutely plummet. And you can see there's a real north-south, or rather a Scotland-to-south split here. We're talking lows of maybe -3 to -5 degrees across a lot of southern England and the Midlands, but just look at the Scottish glens. Temperatures there could plunge to a properly bone-chilling -10 Celsius. And that, of course, brings a massive risk of ice, especially in Scotland, where snow from the other day has been melting and is now just refreezing into sheets of ice. It's the perfect recipe for some really treacherous conditions on the roads. Okay, so let's move the story on. While the UK is sitting under this frosty high pressure, a new character is about to walk onto the stage from stage left, or, well, from the west. Forecasters are keeping a very close eye on this meteorological mystery that's brewing out in the Atlantic, and it's this system that is set to completely flip our weather on its head. And this quote, well, it gets right to the point, doesn't it? We're not just talking about a bit of wind and rain here. Forecasters are genuinely concerned about a potentially nasty area of low pressure. Now, when you hear meteorologists using words like that, it's a real signal that this could be a properly impactful event, bringing with it some really strong winds and a whole lot of rain. And this brings us to the two massive questions that meteorologists are wrestling with right now. It's not really a case of if a storm system is going to arrive, it's more about how it's going to behave when it gets here. First, how deep will that low pressure get, because that determines how intense the storm will be. And second, what exact path is it going to take across the UK? The answers to those two questions will decide everything: who gets the worst of the wind and who sees the heaviest rain. So, how on earth do forecasters deal with this kind of head-scratching uncertainty? Well, in this next bit, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at the science of it all. We'll see the tools they use when they're faced with a system as complex and, frankly, as unpredictable as this one. This just perfectly sums up the problem. What we're looking at are two of the best weather models in the world, and they're telling us slightly different stories. The Met Office's own model, the UKV, has the low tracking across the eastern side of the UK, but the European model, the ECMWF, it thinks the low will be deeper, more powerful, and will track a bit further south. Now that might sound like a small difference, but a shift of just 100 miles or so has massive implications for who gets battered by the strongest winds and who gets the deluge of rain. So how do you make a decision with that conflicting information? Well, forecasters don't just look at one single computer run. They use something called ensemble forecasting. Basically, they run the model dozens of times, each with tiny little changes in the starting conditions. What you get is a spread of possible outcomes. So you can see here the most likely scenario, at about 60% probability, is for the low to cross the central UK. But there's still a 1 in 5 chance it tracks further west, and a 1 in 5 chance it stays further east. This is how modern forecasting works. It's about communicating risk and probability, which is so much more useful than a single "this is what will happen" prediction. But wait, there's another layer to this, another piece of the puzzle. To really understand why this storm is so difficult to pin down, we need to zoom out, way out. Because this isn't just about one little low-pressure system. It's about a huge atmospheric battle playing out over Europe, with a massive block of cold air playing some serious defense. Okay, this is absolutely fascinating. What happens over our heads here in the UK is often just the final step in a chain reaction that starts thousands of miles away. It all began with a monster storm deepening over the Pacific. That sent this pulse of energy, this ripple, shooting through the jet stream. That ripple then built a huge ridge of high pressure over North America. And that, like cracking a whip, has forced the jet stream to buckle and dive south, aiming right for us. But as our Atlantic weather systems arrive, they're slamming into this stubborn wall of cold, high pressure over the continent, and it's forcing them to slow right down and basically stall. Okay, so we've looked at the calm before the storm itself, the forecasting headaches, and the massive global picture. Now, let's bring it all back home. Let's put all that evidence together and work out what it actually means for you here in the UK over the next few days. So, while there's still some question marks over the exact track and the wind speeds, there is one thing that forecasters are much more confident about, and that is heavy rain. They're highlighting the potential for up to 70 millimeters of rain in the wettest areas, and that's mainly across southern parts of England and Wales. Now, 70 millimeters, that is a serious amount of rain to fall in a fairly short space of time. And this is exactly why that number matters so much. 70 millimeters isn't just a don't forget your brolly kind of day. It means there's a very real risk of surface water flooding. And the crucial thing to remember is that the ground is already completely waterlogged from the storms we've had recently, so all this new rain, it's got nowhere to go. This is likely to lead to travel disruption, lots of spray on the roads making driving tricky, and yes, even the potential for some homes and businesses to flood. It's serious enough that the Met Office has already gone ahead and issued a yellow warning for heavy rain for Thursday. So let's just quickly run through the changing hazards this week. Through Tuesday night and into Wednesday, the main issue is going to be that frost and ice, creating some dodgy travel conditions, especially the further north you are. Then, as we get to Thursday and Friday, the focus shifts south to heavy rain and gusty winds, bringing that flood risk and travel disruption. And then, as for the weekend, well, things don't really settle down. We're looking at a lot of lingering low cloud and fog, especially in the east, as these Atlantic systems kind of run out of steam over us. And finally, let's just lift our gaze beyond this one storm. You know, meteorologists are always looking for clues, for signals in the noise, trying to get a handle on the trends for the weeks ahead. So what might happen towards the end of January, after all this is passed? This right here is the million-dollar question on a lot of people's minds, isn't it? We had a properly wintry start to the year, then it's been milder and wetter for a bit. But with that huge block of cold air building to our east, are we about to see a proper winter spell make a comeback? Now, this chart gives us a little peek into those longer range trends. What it's showing is the probability of colder than average conditions over the next couple of weeks. You can see in the first few days that initial cold snap we've been talking about. But what's really interesting is that as you look towards the middle and the end of that period, the signal for below average temperatures actually gets stronger. Now, this does not guarantee a snowstorm or a new beast from the east, but it does tell us that the probability of winter returning is definitely on the rise. And that, I think, is the perfect note to end on. From the short-term certainty of a frost tonight to the longer-term probabilities of a cold snap in a couple of weeks, this week's weather is just a fantastic example of modern meteorology in action. It's such a good reminder that forecasting isn't about gazing into a crystal ball. It's the incredibly complex, fascinating science of weighing up all the evidence, managing uncertainty, and understanding all the different possibilities the atmosphere can throw at us. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.